Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
Greg's not here today. Chad Benson in again for Greg. Jim Garrity is here. Today's Three Martini Lunch being brought to you by ExpressVPN. And a lot of stuff to get today. We'll jump feet first into the good. And Facebook is doing some stuff as they're weeding out those fake accounts. And it's not as simple as it sounds, as we all know, Jim, because I often wonder who's weeding out what, who gets to be the judge, jury, and executioner of taking out some of these fake accounts, because there's plenty of them out there.
Yeah. You're going to think, by the way, that we selected this topic to promote ExpressVPN, but it's entirely coincidental. But we'll talk more about them in a second. Facebook said Tuesday that it identified this political influence campaign detecting 32 pages of fake accounts that engaged in activity around divisive social issues. They said they couldn't say for certain that this was tied to Russia, but they said that it did use some of the tools and techniques used by the Internet Research Agency, otherwise known as that other IRA, that was involved in the Russian attempts to influence the 2016 elections. I think this is good for two reasons, Chad. One being that obviously it's better for Facebook to recognize this now than to say after the election, oh, hey, by the way, some of the advertising was probably tied to foreign intelligence services and things like that. But also the second one is that it wasn't just white nationalist sites, an attempt to do kind of a sequel to the Charlottesville rally last year. There was also activity detected around the hashtag Abolish ICE, the left-wing campaign to end the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. So this kind of muddies the all too convenient and not all that accurate narrative that a lot of Democrats have been eager to embrace, that, oh, Russia is meddling and trying to help the Republicans. No. Those of us who've paid attention have been able to tell Russia isn't pro anybody. Russia just wants Americans to be divided. And you kind of wonder how many people involved with this Abolish ICE movement who might be feeling a shudder of anxiety or concern, recognizing that their effort is being promoted by an as yet unidentified foreign source trying to emulate the tactics of Russians in 2016.
You know, you said something there that I think people don't understand in this whole, dodge and weave and fake news and all this stuff is Russia wanted to disrupt. I don't think they thought they would influence the way that we have we've made it seem like it was because of them and they had all of this power, that because of them, Trump got elected. And the reality, it was a very small portion that was even ever touched by any of these ads as far as seeing them. And they didn't have the influence that they really had. But we're making them think like they had all of this influence, but they just wanted to disrupt.
Yeah, my sense has always been that if you were persuaded to vote for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton because your Facebook feed had a cartoon of Bernie Sanders with the body of a bodybuilder, you were never a Hillary voter in the first place. These were some pretty clumsy, heavy-handed, almost comically over-the-top messaging that I have a hard time believing anyone would actually change their vote on. Never mind, the tens of thousands who'd have to change their votes to actually swing the election. Now, having said that, I don't like the idea of foreign intelligence services trying to meddle in our political process or influence the vote in any direction. So I'm kind of glad Facebook is doing this. It also gives a bit of a vibe of they've had you lose a couple billion in 1 week. Investors get nervous. So I wonder if this is Facebook saying, hey, look, everybody, we're doing what we're supposed to do. And we're trying to be proactive about these things instead of saying after the election, oh, hey, we think we may have been influenced by foreign intelligence. Sorry about that.
They may have, but we're the people. And that's the thing that I always ask, because like you said, if you were influenced by a meme, that's on you. That's not in anybody else. We move from there to the bad, if you will, and Manafort and this whole thing that's going on. And I've got my views on whether or not I think he's guilty of any of the things that he's on trial for, at least this trial. But it is, it's different because Trump wants to know, hey, why didn't I know about any of this stuff?
Yeah, a series of Trump tweets this morning focusing on the trial of Paul Manafort. I think it's worth noting that Paul Manafort is on trial for not reporting the income he was getting from lobbying for a foreign government, Ukrainian political figures who are pro-Putin. But I think anybody who'd bothered to look at Paul Manafort, he'd spent a good 7 or 8 years being one of the primary advisors to this pro-Putin Ukrainian political figure. All of this predates his work for Trump on the presidential campaign. He was not on the Trump presidential campaign for a terribly long time. But this morning, Trump says, I was kind of fascinating this lament of his. Paul Manafort worked for Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole, and many other highly prominent and respected political leaders. Oh, by the way, all very true. He was the floor manager for a couple of those campaigns. He worked for me for a very short time. Pretty accurate. Why didn't government tell me that he was under investigation? These old charges have nothing to do with collusion, a hoax. So it's correct enough about the collusion. This doesn't tie into the broader narrative of Trump somehow being a Putin puppet or something like that. Why didn't the government tell me that he was under investigation? Well, Chad, investigations of crimes are usually secret, right? You don't usually want to tip off somebody. Secondly, the work for the Ukrainian leader, that was all it was out in all the profile pieces of Manafort. When Manafort got hired, everybody kind of knew about this, and it's not terribly surprising that this would come back to bite the president. But again, this is all about stuff that Manafort was doing separate from the Trump campaign. Shady and unsavory and potentially criminal in terms of not reporting it to the government the way you're supposed to. But, just again, not wireless. This is not the smoking gun that takes down Trump that the Democrats want it to be. The other weird tweet just came out 36 minutes ago. Looking back on history, I'm reading Trump's tweet right now. Looking back on history, who was treated worse? Alphonse Capone, legendary mob boss, killer, and public enemy number one, or Paul Manafort, political operative, Reagan-Dole darling, now serving solitary confinement, although convicted of nothing? Where is the Russian collusion? Chad, if you were the president, would you be arguing that Manafort's just being treated too roughly by the justice system right now?
Well, look, I think the treatment that he is getting probably is a bit unfair. I think it's a little bit harsh, being in solitary confinement, even putting him back in jail, saying that he violated some of those things. I mean, I know that the judge, Ellis, has a real issue with some of this. He thought that the Mueller investigation, that this into him was all about getting Trump, and he is shown his skepticism. The reality is it's a dirty world that Manafort was in lobbying, and the guy that he lobbied, for the then Ukrainian president, Yanukovych, there was a lot of money, and, stuff went to Cyprus, and he took out loans on money that was in banks and didn't have to repay. It's a lot of weirdness. But yeah, the fact is do I think he's getting harsh treatment? You could probably say that. You could probably say he probably didn't need to be back in jail. I don't know what he did or didn't do that really warranted that. They talked about him, talking and threatening witnesses and tampering and stuff like that. But it's Trump again, putting himself out there. I always say that there is so much when it comes to him that is self-inflicted, and this is more that he's bringing to it that maybe he doesn't. But it also, to me, and Jim, I'm telling you this, is this sending a signal somewhat to Manafort? I got your back, dude. I'm tweeting about you. I got your back.
If you read between the lines, I suppose you can interpret it that way. By the way, it's worth noting that when Capone was in general population in Alcatraz, he got stabbed. So sometimes there's some who's getting treated rougher by the prison. Actually, Manafort might be doing better.
Well, the reality is, Jim, as we all know, that the Capone probably had a few more enemies inside of a prison than he does.
Yeah. But in that side, look, if I'm trying, I think there's a legitimate argument that Trump can say, I didn't know any about this stuff he was doing for the Ukrainians, which, doesn't reflect well on him, but certainly isn't criminal or anything like that. And then, of course, the argument that Manafort was only on the campaign for a couple of months, and that, whatever other crimes Manafort was doing, there's no reason to think that Trump knew about it or was tied into them in any way, shape, or form. Those are two perfectly valid defenses there. You're being too mean to this guy is not a defense. Like if you really, this is where Trump, I think, plausibly could play the victim here and say, look, I didn't know about any of this stuff. I didn't know he was doing this. Why, I'm paying him to run my campaign, and instead he's, I wouldn't stretch myself out trying to defend Paul Manafort if I were Donald Trump. But
no, I wouldn't either. That's the truth right there. I wouldn't put my neck so far out there, to do anything unless, again, he tried to know something. And when I see Manafort and a lot of these other people, I see them. The first thing I think is all of them were in a position to try to pad their own pocketbooks. I don't think they cared anything about Trump as a human being, anything about Trump as a president. They thought, what can this guy do for my bottom line, is the way I look at it.
Chad, between Manafort being in jail and obviously the feds monitoring his communications and what we talked about in the earlier Martini about Facebook, it's a good time to worry about your online security. With all the recent news about online security breaches, it's hard not to worry about where your data goes. Making an online purchase or simply accessing your email could put your private information at risk. You are being tracked online by social media sites, marketing companies, and your mobile or internet provider. Not only can they record your browsing history, but they often sell it to other corporations who want to profit from your information. That's why you can take back your privacy by using ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN has easy-to-use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, or tablet. Turning on ExpressVPN protection just takes one click. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and hiding your public IP address. Protecting yourself with ExpressVPN costs less than $7 a month, and it is rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar and comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you ever use public Wi-Fi and want to keep hackers and spies from seeing your data, ExpressVPN is the solution. And if you don't want to hand over your online history to your internet provider or to data resellers, ExpressVPN is the answer. Protect your online activity today and find out how you can get 3 months free at expressvpn.com/martini. That is expressvpn.com/martini for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Once again, visit expressvpn.com/martini to learn more. And now on to our crazy martini.
And it is crazy. So yesterday we had William Crystal. I called him Billy with a K. Crystal, or William Crystal, of course, the famed conservative who is definitely an anti-Trump guy. We move on today to somebody who is very interesting, very successful in his own right, and has flirted with the idea before. And now maybe flirting a little bit more, maybe even to the point where underneath the table, a little cozy with the feet there. We're talking about Howard Schultz of the Starbucks fame, maybe looking at a run in 2020.
Yeah, and what's getting a kind of a new round of buzz this morning is the report that Steve Schmidt, people may remember that name from the John McCain presidential campaign back in 2008. He was the campaign manager and a lot of MSNBC appearances in the years since. He worked for Schultz as a corporate client in his consulting business in the years after the McCain campaign. And now with Schultz stepping down from Starbucks and Schmidt himself also stepping away from his corporate consulting, the expectation is that the two of them will be teaming up in the not too distant future to set up the Schultz 2020 campaign. Now it's worth, Chad, way back in 2004, I was a tadpole reporter just starting with National Review, and I met Steve Schmidt. And people, very easy to forget, he was running the War Room under Karl Rove back in the 2004 campaign. And obviously, post 2008, he turned into a very vociferous critic to Sarah Palin. And basically, he's been on MSNBC saying that the Republicans are wrong about everything just about every day since then. So it's not that surprising that he would jump on a Democratic campaign. Chad, I don't know about you, but this does seem like a weird match made in heaven, because if you're a consultant, Howard Schultz is exactly what you want as a client. He's extremely wealthy, so money is no object. He's from outside politics, so he doesn't know how presidential campaigns are run. He doesn't know whether this is a good expense or a bad expense. And he probably is naive enough to believe that, he looks in the mirror and he sees a potential president, and he's willing to pay well to make that effort. And my suspicion is this is going to end with a lot of coffee drunk, a lot of money spent, probably a lot of TV advertising, but in the end, probably not a lot of votes in the Democratic presidential primary for Howard Schultz.
You know what? Here's my thing with Howard Schultz. I find him to be very interesting because I think, and I may be wrong, and Steve Schmidt may be looking at Howard saying, you know what, maybe we missed with Trump, but somebody who could be somewhat of a centrist, who can appeal to those Democrats that feel like they're being left behind by the progressives, to some of the people that voted for Trump because they didn't like Hillary, and a lot of the other independents in there. And this guy, he's got the money, he's got somewhat of a name recognition. Maybe he could make somewhat of some noise out there, and it would be interesting I think, for him to run. Some of the stuff that he says, I actually agree with. I like. I think like I said, I think he's a very interesting character. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of people out there that feel snake bitten because of Trump, and they're wondering, are we walking into another one of those situations where you've got no political past whatsoever, and you've got no political cachet, and there's no experience there, and we've kind of learned our lesson there.
Yeah, governing is a skill. Bringing people together to pass legislation on complicated, divisive issues is not necessarily something that you can just jump from the corporate, suite and jump into politics. We've seen this, and I kind of feel like this is this long history of this, going back to Carly Fiorina, H. Russ Perot, Steve Forbes, Herman Cain. Trump really is the exception. I'd argue that actually that his corporate identity was, I think, only a small part of his appeal of 2016. I think the fact that he was this rambunctious outsider. I guess here's the thing. In the end, Trump was a very anti-establishment candidate, and I have a very hard time seeing you positioning Howard Schultz, who's been the CEO of Starbucks basically since 1987. I mean, like, probably a quarter of the electorate that will have been born after 1987, for perspective. And he's a billionaire worth probably about $3 billion roughly. I just don't.
3.1 actually.
Sanders wing of the campaign jump onto that bandwagon, and I just think it'll be a challenging sell to the American people. But of course, stranger things have happened.
Well, that's the way I always look at it. Stranger things are happening. I think Trump paved a way for a lot of people. I would be interested to see this. I'd also be interested, like I said before, if somebody like Mark Cuban jumped into it. That also interests me in this day and age. And I think the more, the merrier, and we'll see what takes place. But, I think a lot of these guys, as we all know, they all have big egos, and they've run these massive corporations. They have billions of dollars. It's not about the money, because there's no money in politics for what they're trying to do. It's about another feather in the cap. It's the big game hunting, and this is the biggest game of all.
Probably absolutely accurate. And my suspicion is the 2020 cycle is going to see more people hunting that big game instead of fewer.
Yeah. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Another solid day, my man. We definitely got through it. Whew. Lots of it. We had you good with the Facebook. We had you bad with the Manafort and Trump. And we had the crazy with Steve Schmidt and Howard Schultz maybe plotting some sort of, coffee coup to the White House, if you will, in 2020. I guess we're going to do it again tomorrow.
Looking forward to it, Chad.
Have yourself a wonderful day, and we'll be back here tomorrow. Chad Benson in for Greg Columbus, and Jim Garrity is always here in your 3 Martini Lunch.